The Last Architect, a story of betrayal, survival and reckoning. Part 1. The foundation cracks. This is the key to your new life. Without me. You know that moment when the ground beneath your feet turns out to be made of paper. When everything you believed was solid, the marriage, the partnership, the life you spent 2 decades building, dissolves into something you can barely recognize. Mine came on a Tuesday evening in October at a rooftop celebration I'd helped plan. Watching my wife of 11 years feed champagne to another man while I stood near the elevator bank, like a contractor who'd wandered into the wrong party. My name is Daniel Reeves. I was, until recently, the co-founder and lead architect of Reeves & Callaway Design Group, one of the most respected architectural firms in Harrington Bay, a coastal city that sits at the intersection of old money and new ambition, where glass towers cast long shadows over Victorian neighborhoods, and everyone who matters knows everyone else by their first name. The rooftop belonged to the Halcyon, a 42-story mixed-use development that my firm had designed over the course of 3 grueling years. It was our masterpiece, a building that had won 2 regional awards before its ribbon cutting and earned a spread in Architectural Digest that my mother had framed and hung in her kitchen in Vermont. Tonight, it was hosting a celebration for my wife, Celeste, who had just been named a partner at Whitmore & Associates, the city's most prestigious real estate law firm. 200 people filled the rooftop terrace, their laughter rising into the night air against a backdrop of lights that stretched from the harbor to the hills. Celeste had insisted on this venue, and I'd been happy to arrange it. The building was partly mine after all. Or so I'd believed. Daniel. A hand settled on my shoulder with the warmth of something rehearsed. I turned to find Gerald Whitmore himself, Celeste's managing partner, a man who had the practiced geniality of someone who'd shaken 10,000 hands and remembered none of them. He was 71 years old and wore his silver hair like a crown. "Wonderful venue. You really do have an eye for these things." "I had help," I said. "Modesty. How refreshing." Gerald's gaze drifted across the terrace to where Celeste stood near the bar, laughing at something the man beside her had said. "You know, I wasn't sure about bringing Celeste onto the equity track this quickly. 7 years is fast for a partner promotion. But she's made believers out of all of us. She works hard." I agreed, watching the man beside her lean close to say something. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with dark hair that had gone silver at the temples in exactly the right way. His suit fit the way suits fit on men who had them made rather than bought. I'd seen him at 2 firm events in the past 4 months, always near Celeste, always with that same easy, proprietary quality to his attention. "Who's that she's speaking with?" Gerald followed my gaze. "Marcus Harlow. He's a developer, commercial real estate mostly. Brilliant mind for acquisitions. He's been instrumental in several of our biggest transactions this year." He smiled. "They make quite the team." The word landed wrong, but I couldn't say why. "I'll bet they do." I excused myself and made my way toward the bar, taking a route that brought me close enough to hear snatches of their conversation. Celeste had her hand on Marcus Harlow's forearm, a gesture so natural it suggested practice. "Told you it would work," she was saying. "You just have to trust the process." "I trust you," Marcus said, and the simplicity of it, the unguarded warmth in his voice, made me stop walking entirely. For a long moment, I stood among 200 people and felt completely alone. I got a drink. I found a corner near the railing where the city spread out below me like a circuit board, all pulse and light. I counted the minutes. I thought about the hotel receipt I'd found in Celeste's coat pocket 3 weeks ago, which she'd explained as a client dinner, an explanation I'd accepted because I'd wanted to. Because the alternative required a kind of courage I hadn't been ready to find. "You look like a man doing math in his head." The voice came from my left. I turned to find a woman I didn't recognize, mid-30s, dark brown skin, natural hair, pulled back, wearing a deep green dress that suggested she'd come from somewhere more interesting than a law firm celebration. She was holding a club soda and watching me with the alert attention of someone accustomed to noticing things other people missed. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "Only if you know what to look for." She offered her hand. "Nia Okafor. I'm a journalist, investigative mostly. I cover financial crimes and corporate fraud for the Harrington Bay Chronicle." "Daniel Reeves. I'm an architect." I shook her hand. "What brings a financial journalist to a real estate law celebration?" "Research." Her eyes moved briefly toward Marcus Harlow before returning to me. "And you seem more like someone enduring this party than enjoying it." "It's my wife's celebration," I said. I'm the supporting cast. Nia nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she'd suspected. Have you met Marcus Harlow? Something in her tone made me set my drink down carefully. In passing. Why? Just curious. She reached into her small clutch and produced a business card. Heavy stock, clean design. If you ever want to talk about anything architecture or otherwise, don't hesitate to reach out. She smiled and disappeared into the crowd before I could ask the question forming in my mind. I pocketed her card and turned back to find Celeste. She was dancing now, a slow revolving kind of movement that the small jazz trio in the corner had invited, and Marcus Harlow had his hand at the small of her back with a familiarity that required no explanation. I watched them for 30 seconds. Then I went home. The apartment we shared was on the 14th floor of a building I'd designed for a client who'd later become a friend. It had 15-foot ceilings, a wall of south-facing glass, and a kitchen that Celeste had renovated twice because the first version hadn't been right. I'd loved this apartment unconditionally for 9 years. Standing in it now at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, I felt like a tourist. I poured 2 fingers of scotch and sat at my drafting table. I still used one, a habit from architecture school that no one else at the firm shared anymore, and I pulled out Nia Okafor's business card. I didn't call her that night. Instead, I opened my laptop and started searching. Marcus Harlow. 44 years old. CEO of Harlow Meridian Capital, a commercial real estate investment company headquartered in Harrington Bay. 3 years ago, he'd relocated from Chicago after a period he described in interviews as a strategic reset. Before that, he'd been a partner at a development firm called Cascade Crown Investments, which had dissolved following a civil lawsuit. The lawsuit details were sealed, but the plaintiff had been a woman named Patricia Seo, a tech entrepreneur who had lost a majority stake in her company. The case had been settled out of court. I dug deeper. Cascade Crown's dissolution had been followed by Marcus resurfacing under a new name and a new entity. But the pattern was familiar. Wealthy women, close relationships, financial entanglements that ended with his partners diminished and him intact. 2 other names surfaced in connection with his Chicago years, a gallery owner named Diane Wolf and a restaurateur named Keiko Tanaka, both of whom had been romantically linked to Marcus, and both of whom had experienced significant financial losses in the years they'd known him. I sat back and stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened a new tab and pulled up our joint financial accounts. What I found made the scotch taste like water. Over the past 6 months, Celeste had made 11 transfers from our shared investment account amounts, ranging from $8,000 to $45,000, all routed to an LLC called Meridian Creative Partners. I searched the company name. It didn't appear in any public registry I could access. But the registered agent on file, a detail I found through a business database my firm subscribed to for contractor vetting, was a law office. Whitmore and Associates. Celeste's firm. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a very long time, listening to the city below, and I let myself feel the full weight of what I was looking at. Then I stopped feeling it and started planning. Part 2, stress testing. The next morning, I called the one person I trusted without reservation. "You sound like you slept in a trench," said the voice on the other end. "Close enough." I poured coffee and moved to the window. "Priya, I need to talk. Not as colleagues, as friends." Priya Anand had been my business partner for 11 years and my closest friend for 15. She was 51, small, precise, and possessed of a demolishing intelligence that she deployed with surgical patience. She had built the structural engineering division of our firm from 2 employees to 23, and she had the rare quality of being impossible to rattle. She listened without interrupting as I laid out everything: the hotel receipt, the rooftop party, Marcus Harlow's hand on Celeste's back, Nia Okafor's card, and what I'd found in the financial records at midnight. When I finished, there was a silence that felt like a held breath. "Send me the account statements," she said finally. "Priya, send them to my personal email, not the office one. And Daniel, don't touch anything else in those accounts until we've spoken again." 2 hours later, she called back. "The transfers to Meridian Creative Partners are consistent with the pattern I recognize," she said. Her voice was careful in the way voices get when someone is controlling what they're feeling. "I've seen this before in a business context. Someone sets up a shell company, routes funds through a registered agent to obscure the trail, and by the time anyone notices, the money has moved several times and is functionally untraceable. How much are we talking about total? From the joint account alone, around $260,000 over 6 months." She paused. But Daniel, if they've also accessed your business equity, your stake in the firm, the number could be significantly higher. You need to talk to a lawyer today. Not a family lawyer, a financial crimes attorney. You think Celeste knows what she's doing. You don't think she could be being manipulated by Harlow. Priya's tone was gentle, but not soft. She could be. People do terrible things under the influence of someone skilled at producing those feelings. But that's a question for later. Right now, you need to protect yourself regardless of her intentions. I thought about the hotel receipt. About 11 months of late nights she'd explained and weekend trips she'd described, and a coolness between us that I'd attributed to stress. How long do you think this has been happening? Based on the first transfer date, at least 8 months. 8 months. I'd been living beside a stranger for 8 months and told myself it was the ordinary friction of two busy people. One more thing, Priya said. I did some research on Harlow Meridian Capital this morning. Their last 2 major development projects are both behind schedule and there are vendor liens filed against both properties. Marcus Harlow is in serious financial difficulty. Whatever he's doing with Celeste, it isn't just personal. After I hung up, I sat with that for a moment. Then I called the number on Nia Okafor's card. She met me at a coffee shop near the waterfront, the kind with mismatched furniture and no background music, where conversations were private by default. She arrived 4 minutes before me and already had 2 coffees on the table, which told me she'd expected the call. You looked into him, I said, sitting down. I've been looking into him for 14 months, she said. Marcus Harlow is not his original name. His birth name is Marcus Heller. He changed it legally in 2019, about 18 months after the Cascade Crown situation in Chicago. She slid a folder across the table. I've been building a case, but I need something I don't have, yet a primary source. Someone inside the pattern who can speak to what he actually does, step by step. I opened the folder. The photographs inside were organized chronologically. Marcus at charity events. Marcus at restaurant openings. Marcus in proximity to women whose faces I could cross-reference with the names I'd found the night before. And near the back, a photograph taken outside the very building I'd designed Marcus and Celeste, standing close, his hand at her elbow. Her face turned toward his with an expression I recognized from years ago, before we'd settled into something quieter. What's his full play? I asked. Walk me through it. Nia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. He identifies women who have access to significant assets through their own work, through a marriage, through an inheritance. He cultivates a relationship, sometimes romantic, sometimes presented as a professional partnership, sometimes both. He establishes trust slowly over months. Then he begins moving money. Small amounts first. Always with a plausible business rationale. Then larger amounts through layered entities that are difficult to trace. By the time his target realizes what's happening, the funds have moved 3 or 4 times, and he has legal cover, a contract, a signed agreement, something that makes it look like a legitimate investment. And the women don't go to the police. Some do, but he's careful about which jurisdiction he operates in and about the documentation he creates. The agreements look real because they are real. He just withholds the context that would reveal what he's actually doing. She looked at me steadily. Patricia Seo, the woman from Chicago, spent 4 years in litigation and recovered 30 cents on the dollar. He left her with the legal bills. How many women? That I can document 5. That I suspect closer to 8 or 9. She paused. Your wife may genuinely believe she's in a business partnership with him. Or she may know exactly what's happening. I don't have enough to say which yet. I thought about Celeste in that green dress at the rooftop, laughing at something he'd said. About the ease of it, the comfort, the way they'd moved together like people who'd rehearsed. What do you need from me? I asked. Access, your perspective. And, she hesitated, if the opportunity arises, documentation. I can't ask you to do anything that would compromise your own legal position, but if Marcus ever speaks to you directly, or if you're ever in a situation where you can record a conversation legally. I spent 6 years in the Naval Reserve, I said. Intelligence Division. I know how to gather evidence. Nia looked at me for a moment. Then she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that held real warmth. Okay, she said. Then let's build something solid. The first thing I did was call a lawyer named Raymond Osei, a financial crimes and asset protection attorney who Priya had worked with on a corporate matter 3 years ago. He was in his early 50s, unhurried in the way of someone who never charged less than $400 an hour and knew it was worth it. Walk me through everything chronologically. he said when I settled into the chair across from his desk. I did. He took notes without reaction. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, reviewing what he'd written. The transfers to Meridian Creative Partners are problematic for them, not for you, he said. You're a victim of potential fraud, not a perpetrator. The question is how far the money has moved and whether we can trace it. He set his pen down. I want you to do something counterintuitive. Don't freeze the joint accounts yet. If they realize you know, they'll accelerate whatever they're planning. We want them to think you're in the dark for as long as possible. How long do I have? Depends on what their timeline is. If Harlow is in the financial difficulty your partner described, he may be feeling pressure to move quickly. Raymond looked at me steadily. We also need to consider your business equity. Is your partnership agreement with Miss Anand current? We updated it 2 years ago. Good, bring me a copy. If Celeste has any marital claim on your equity in Reeves and Calloway, she or someone acting through her may try to leverage that as part of a settlement or legal proceeding. He paused. I want to be direct with you, Mr. Reeves. The scenario I'm describing where a spouse is used as a financial access point by a third party is not uncommon. What's also not uncommon is that the spouse, even if they began as an unwitting participant, eventually becomes a willing one. Be prepared for either possibility. I nodded. I'd been preparing for it since midnight. One more question, I said. If I'm going to gather evidence recordings documentation, what are the legal parameters in this state? Raymond's expression was careful. Harrington Bay falls under state law, which follows the one-party consent rule for audio recordings. If you're a participant in the conversation, you can record it without informing the other party. Video in semi-public or public spaces is generally permissible. I'd recommend you not record in any space where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy, bedrooms, private offices, that kind of thing. He held my gaze. I'd also recommend you consult me before you do anything that involves entering a space you don't have authorization to enter. Understood, I said. I thanked him, shook his hand, and went back to work. That evening after meeting Raymond, I drove through the city for an hour without a destination. It was the kind of October evening that Harrington Bay does better than anywhere else I've lived. The air carrying equal parts ocean and autumn, the light on the harbor, doing something complicated that no photograph I'd ever seen had managed to capture accurately. I'd loved this city for 20 years. I'd built pieces of it. Literally. The Halcyon was mine. The Meridian Arts Center on the south waterfront was mine. The Pellegrino residential complex in the Gable district was mine and Priya's. You invest a city with your work, and it becomes yours in a way that's different from ownership. It becomes the place where you put the best of what you had on a given day. And that doesn't disappear when the day does. I thought about that as I drove. About the permanence of buildings. About the fact that Marcus Harlow could take my money, could conceivably take my equity stake, could attempt, as the recording would later reveal, to take my legal capacity, but he could not take the Halcyon. He could not take the weight of what I'd carried into that project and laid down in steel and glass and 42 floors of considered space. That remained regardless of what happened next. I don't know why it helped to think about that, but it did. The second week I met Nia twice more. The first meeting was at her office at the Chronicle, a converted warehouse space in the media district that had the organized chaos of a place where serious work was happening faster than the filing systems could absorb it. She had a corner desk surrounded by filing boxes and a whiteboard covered in names connected by lines, the kind of visual evidence map that looks, to someone unfamiliar with investigative journalism, like the interior of an obsessive mind. To me, it looked like a structural diagram. Tell me about the other victims, I said. She walked me through them one by one with the kind of precision that came from 14 months of accumulated detail. Patricia Seo, the Chicago tech entrepreneur, had met Marcus through a real estate investment group. The relationship had begun professionally. He'd approached her fund about a co-investment opportunity and had moved into personal territory over about 3 months. By the time she realized the investment structure was fraudulent, 17% of her company's working capital was gone, and Marcus had documentation suggesting she'd authorized every transfer. The lawsuit had taken 4 years and recovered less than a third. Diane Wolfe had run a contemporary art gallery in Chicago's River North neighborhood. She'd met Marcus at an opening. He'd been charming, sophisticated, genuinely knowledgeable about art, in a way that turned out to be calculated research. Their relationship had been openly romantic. within 8 months. He'd been involved in the gallery's financing decisions and had quietly shifted its debt structure in a way that made her personally liable for losses she hadn't known the gallery was taking. She'd closed the gallery and spent 2 years in financial recovery. Keiko Tanaka had owned a restaurant group, 3 locations, all critically regarded, all successful. Her encounter with Marcus had been the most elaborate of the documented cases. He'd presented himself as a hospitality investor, proposed a formal expansion partnership, had lawyers draw up agreements that appeared comprehensive and fair, and then systematically redirected revenue from the partnership accounts in a manner that took 18 months to fully unravel. She'd sold 2 of the 3 restaurants to cover the losses. "He learns from each one," Nia said, standing at the whiteboard. "The first victim he moved too fast and the financial trail was too obvious. With each subsequent case, he's refined the process better. Documentation, better cover stories, better timing. You were always going to be harder because you have intelligence experience. He may not have known that going in. Or he may have and thought it didn't matter," I said. "He'd gotten comfortable." "Yes," she said. "Comfort is usually where they make the mistake." The second meeting that week was at a hardware store. Oddly enough, she'd needed to pick up something for her apartment, and we'd discovered simultaneously that we both found hardware stores restful in the way that people who work with their hands often do, the organized density of specific solutions to specific problems. We walked the aisles while she briefed me on Detective Whitfield's current case status. "Rosa's been building this for 8 months, but she needs a complaining witness who's been directly victimized in this jurisdiction," Nia said, turning a level over in her hands. "The Chicago cases give her pattern evidence, but they're out of state. The fraud against you is here. If you file a formal complaint, she can open a full investigation with subpoena power." "When's the right time to file?" "After you have the recording," she set the level back. "If you can get Harlow to speak on record, confirm the plan, confirm the intent, the investigation becomes much faster and the prosecution becomes much stronger. And if I can't get the recording, then we file with what we have, and it takes longer, and the outcome is less certain." She met my eyes. "But the recording would change everything." "I know," I said. For 2 weeks, I played the role I'd been cast in, the distracted, absorbed, mildly oblivious architect husband who thought his wife's late nights were billable hours and her distance was just the pressure of a new partnership role. I came home at the right times. I made dinner twice. I asked about her cases with the appropriate level of interested but not probing husbandly curiosity. Celeste, for her part, was a flawless performer. She was warm when warmth was required and tired when fatigue was plausible. She'd always been intelligent. It was one of the first things that had drawn me to her, that precision of thought, the way she processed information quickly and spoke with unusual clarity. Watching her now, I saw those same qualities in a different light. The precision wasn't warmth, it was calculation. Meanwhile, I was building. Nia had connected me with a private investigator named Dexter Farrow, ex-law enforcement licensed meticulous, the kind of man who delivered photographs with timestamps and coordinates and never editorialized it. Within 10 days, he'd documented 7 meetings between Celeste and Marcus across 3 different locations. A private dining room at a restaurant called the Meridian Grill, a co-working space registered under a holding company name, and twice a residential building on the north side of the city whose penthouse was registered to a trust called Harlow Family Holdings. On day 12, Priya called me to her office and closed the door, which she rarely did. "I found something in the firm's accounts," she said. She was very still in the way she got when she was managing a strong reaction. 6 weeks ago, Celeste filed an amended spousal disclosure with our partnership agreement's financial review clause. It was routed through our accounting firm as a routine marital asset update. She slid a document across her desk. "She's listed your equity stake in Reeves and Callaway as a marital asset subject to equitable distribution." I stared at the page. She listed the firm. "Your 49% stake in it, yes." Priya's voice was controlled, but I could hear the fury underneath. "Daniel, if she files for divorce and this designation holds, she could potentially force a sale of your equity to a buyer of her choosing at a valuation that would be determined by attorneys she's already retained." The math assembled itself without invitation. Reeves and Callaway was currently valued at approximately $8 million. My 49% stake was just under $4 million. A forced sale at a negotiated or manipulated valuation could be anything. And if the buyer was a company connected to Marcus Harlow. She's not just having an affair, I said. It came out flat, almost conversational. She's a piece in a larger play. That's my reading, Priya said. How did she access the financial disclosure that should have required my signature? The amended version was submitted with a signature page that includes what appears to be your signature. Priya looked at me directly. It's not your signature, Daniel. I've seen your signature for 11 years. I took the document and studied the signature at the bottom. It was close, very close, but not mine. The loop on the R was wrong. The tail on the final S curved when mine didn't. I photographed the page with my phone. Then I called Raymond Osei. Part 3, load-bearing walls. There's a concept in structural engineering that Priya had explained to me early in our partnership. Every structure has load-bearing walls, the elements that hold everything else up. Remove them incorrectly and the whole thing collapses. The key to a controlled demolition is understanding which walls those are and in what order to bring them down. Marcus Harlow was a load-bearing wall in whatever Celeste had agreed to, but he wasn't the only one. Nia, Raymond, Priya and I met at Raymond's office on a Thursday afternoon and spent 2 hours laying out what we knew. Nia brought her 14 months of documentation. Raymond brought his analysis of the financial transfers. Priya brought the amended disclosure with the forged signature. Dexter Farrow had sent over a supplemental surveillance report that morning, including an audio recording of a conversation captured in the outdoor seating area of the Meridian Grill, a public space, one-party consent fully applicable in which Marcus Harlow could be heard discussing the timeline and making sure the filing happens before he can move assets. "They are planning to file before you do," Raymond said. "If Celeste files for divorce first and the amended equity disclosure is in the system, it creates a presumption they'll use to argue for expedited asset division. They need that to happen before you can challenge the signature." When I asked, "My estimate given the pressure Harlow is under financially 2 weeks, maybe less. Then we need to move first," I said. "That means filing for divorce and simultaneously filing a motion to invalidate the equity disclosure on the grounds of forgery," Raymond said. "We'll also want to file a report with the Financial Crimes Unit regarding the transfers to Meridian Creative Partners." He looked at Nia. "Your documentation would significantly strengthen the police investigation. I can share everything I have with the fraud unit," Nia said. "I've been in contact with a detective named Rosa Whitfield, who's been building a parallel case on Harlow for the past 8 months. She's been waiting for a primary complainant, withstanding someone directly victimized who can trigger an official investigation." "That's me," I said. "That's you," she confirmed. Priya leaned forward. "There's one thing we haven't addressed. If we file everything at once, the divorce, the forgery motion, the fraud report, Marcus will know immediately. He may try to move the money faster or disappear. Which is why," I said slowly, "I need to have a conversation with them before any of this happens." The room was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant risk," Raymond said carefully. "I know, but I need to know the full scope of what they planned, not just what I can infer from documents. And," I looked at Dexter Farrow's report at the address of the Harlow Family Holdings penthouse, "I think I know how to get it." The Harlow Family Holdings building was a 30-story residential tower on Archer Street, 16 blocks north of the Halcyon. I knew the building. I'd competed for the commission 8 years ago and lost it to a firm from Seattle. I knew its layout from the permit filings which were public record. The penthouse occupied the full 30th floor. It had 2 access points, the main elevator, which required a key fob, and the service elevator, which accessed via a stairwell from the parking structure. The service elevator required a staff credential, but the stairwell from the parking structure to the service corridor was accessible to anyone with a parking structure keycard, which could be obtained by telling the attendant you were there for a delivery. I'd spent 6 years in naval intelligence. I'd never done anything more dramatic with it than background checks and signals monitoring, but the principles translated. On a Wednesday evening, wearing a jacket that matched the building's maintenance staff and carrying a tool case I'd borrowed from Dexter, I walked through the parking structure, took the stairwell to the 29th floor and rode the service elevator to 30. The service corridor on 30 was quiet. I could hear music from inside the penthouse, something orchestral, low volume. I positioned the tool case against the wall near the main entry, activated the recording device I'd purchased, model approved by Raymond, operating within the one-party consent framework, provided I was present in the space once the door was opened and knocked. It took 20 seconds. When the door opened, Marcus Harlow was holding a glass of red wine and wearing the expression of a man who expects to find a delivery on the other side of the door and instead finds the one complication he'd been trying to avoid. "Daniel Reeves," he said. His voice was smooth as lacquered wood. "Marcus," I said pleasantly. "Mind if I come in?" He looked at me for a long moment, making calculations. Then he stepped back. The penthouse was everything I would have predicted expensive without being ostentatious. The careful restraint of someone who wanted to project taste rather than wealth. Celeste was seated on the couch with her legs tucked beneath her, a glass of wine in hand, wearing the expression of someone who's been caught, but hasn't yet decided what that means. "Luke," she said, then correcting herself with effort, "Daniel." I didn't miss it. "Celeste." I settled into an armchair across from the couch without being invited. "Beautiful place. I heard a lot about the original design. The Seattle firm did some interesting things with the ceiling treatment." I looked up. "Though the HVAC placement has always bothered me. You can hear it from this room when the wind comes off the water." Marcus remained standing near the window. "I'm not sure what you think you're doing, but—" "Visiting," I said. "We've never really had a chance to talk. You've been so central to Celeste's life lately that it seemed like an oversight." I looked at my wife. "Don't you think?" Celeste set her wine glass down with a careful movement. "Daniel, this isn't—" "I found the transfers," I said. The directness of it landed in the room like a dropped object. "Meridian Creative Partners. 260,000 from our joint accounts over the last 6 months. I watched Marcus's face. The wine glass in his hand didn't move, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I also found the amended equity disclosure, the one with the signature that isn't mine." The silence stretched. "I'm not sure what you think you found," Marcus began. "I'm sure you're not." I settled back in the chair, letting the patience I'd cultivated over 2 weeks hold me steady. "Let me tell you what I think happened. You met Celeste through professional channels, probably given the law firm's involvement in your projects. You recognized an access point, a woman who is intelligent, ambitious, and married to a man with substantial assets and no prenuptial agreement. You cultivated the relationship. You made her feel seen and understood and valued in ways that, I'll be honest, I may have failed to do toward the end. And then you began the real work." I looked at Celeste. "You gave her a rationale, a story that made it feel like a partnership rather than a theft. Something about investment opportunity, a future." Celeste's face had gone through several configurations. She'd landed on something that was not quite defiance and not quite shame. "The equity disclosure was meant to give you access to my stake in the firm," I continued. "Once Celeste filed for divorce under those terms, you'd be positioned to acquire my equity at a distressed valuation through Meridian Creative, or a connected entity, and use the firm's client relationships and project pipeline to stabilize your own financial position, which is, according to the vendor liens on your last 2 properties, considerably less stable than your public profile suggests." I watched the two of them process this. Marcus was better at concealing his reaction. He'd had more practice. Celeste looked like someone watching a wall they'd relied on begin to crack. "You can't prove any of this," Marcus said. "I can prove the transfers. I can prove the forged signature. And I can prove through 14 months of documentation, compiled by a journalist who's been investigating you since you left Chicago, that this is not the first time you've done this." I looked at him steadily. "Patricia Seo, Diane Wolf, Keiko Tanaka. The woman before them, whose case never made it to a filing because you moved fast enough. Shall I continue?" The room was very quiet. "What do you want?" Celeste asked. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Right now, I want the truth. On the record." I reached into my jacket pocket and set my phone on the coffee table. The recording light was a small red dot. "Everything. How it started, what the plan was, who helped you, where the money went, all of it." "You can't use," Marcus started. "One-party consent state," I said. "I'm a participant in this conversation. Everything said in this room since the door opened is legally recorded." I held his gaze. "You have a choice. You can refuse, and I walk out of here and files what I already have, which is enough to trigger a federal fraud investigation, a forgery prosecution, and a media story that will end Harlow Meridian Capital before the end of the month. Or you can talk to me, and I'll have more complete information to share with the detective who's been building a case on you, which might be considered cooperation at a sentencing stage." "You're bluffing," Marcus said. but the confidence in it was the kind that comes from needing to believe something rather than knowing it. "My attorney's name is Raymond Ossie," I said. "Call him." Marcus didn't move. Something in his posture changed the subtle deflation of someone calculating odds and not liking the numbers. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Celeste said quietly. "Celeste!" Marcus's voice carried a warning. "It wasn't," she said again, and looked at me with something complicated in her expression. "He came to me through the Whitmore acquisition last year. He was a client. We started talking, and then it wasn't supposed to be about the firm, Daniel. He told me we were going to build something together. He said your partnership with Priya was limiting you, that you had assets tied up in a structure that wasn't serving you. He told you I'd be better off," I said. "He said the equity revaluation would free up capital that we could reinvest." "Celeste." I was quiet for a moment. "He told you a story that made theft sound like help. That's what he does. I've read about the other women." She flinched. "I need you to tell me everything," I said. "Every conversation, every document you signed, every account you know about. If you cooperate fully, your attorney will have something to work with. If you don't," I looked at Marcus, "you'll be defending yourself alone, because I assure you, Marcus has no interest in being anyone's anchor when the current gets strong." Marcus said nothing, which was itself a kind of confirmation. Celeste began to talk. She talked for an hour and 40 minutes. I let her go wherever she needed to go, the beginning, the middle, the rationalizations, the moments. She'd noticed something wrong and talked herself past it. By the end of it, we had the names of 3 additional co-conspirators, a lawyer at Whitmore named Bernard Croft, who had helped structure the equity disclosure, a forensic accountant named Helen Park, who had handled the layered transfers, and a contact at a private psychiatric evaluation firm, a detail Celeste disclosed with visible discomfort, who Marcus had approached about a contingency evaluation process for me in the event that an involuntary assessment was needed to support a guardianship proceeding. The guardianship angle was new, and it was what finally made Marcus speak. "I wanted on record that the psychiatric evaluation option was never finalized." He said the first words he'd contributed in an hour. "It's noted," I said. "But the contact exists, and the conversation happened, and that will be in the record regardless of what you say now." I stood up and picked up my phone. "Thank you both for your time." I looked at Celeste. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours tomorrow morning. I'd recommend you retain separate counsel immediately." I looked at Marcus. "And I'd recommend you don't leave the city. Detective Rosa Whitfield has your passport details." I left them in the penthouse and took the service elevator back down. In the parking structure, I sat in my car for 5 minutes before starting the engine. I'd expected to feel something large, triumph or grief or some clean emotion I could name, and file away. Instead, there was just a steady, functional clarity, the kind that comes at the end of a long project when you can see the structure clearly for the first time. I started the engine and drove to Raymond Ossie's office, where he was waiting with coffee and a yellow legal pad. Part 4. Structural Failure. The filing happened the next morning. Raymond submitted the divorce petition, the motion to invalidate the equity disclosure, and the formal fraud complaint simultaneously. Nia coordinated with Detective Whitfield, who had been briefed on the recordings and was ready to move. By 10 a.m., Bernard Croft had been served with a subpoena at his office at Whitmore & Associates. By noon, Helen Park's financial records were under a federal hold. Marcus Harlow was arrested at the Archer Street penthouse at 2:15 p.m. on charges that included fraud conspiracy to commit fraud forgery by way of intermediary, and a charge that felt particularly appropriate, attempted unlawful interference with a person's legal capacity related to the guardianship inquiry. Celeste was arrested at the Whitmore & Associates offices at 2:45. The news traveled through the Harrington Bay legal community at the speed that only catastrophe manages. Her name appeared on the Chronicle's website at 4 p.m. under a headline that Nia had clearly been waiting to write for a long time. I watched none of it directly. I was in Priya's office working. "You know you don't have to be here today," she said around 3 o'clock. "I know." I set down the pencil I'd been using on a revised elevation sketch. "I'd rather be useful." Priya looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded and handed me the coffee she'd poured 20 minutes ago and forgotten. The arraignment was covered by 3 television stations and a podcast that specialized in financial crime. Raymond sat beside me in the gallery as Marcus Harlow entered the courtroom in the kind of suit that had cost $2,000 and now looked like a costume. The charges were read. The bail was set high, given the fraud amount and the evidence of flight risk, including a one-way ticket to Lisbon that Dexter had documented 3 days earlier. Marcus looked at the gallery once briefly, and his eyes found mine with the expression of someone still calculating whether there was a play they hadn't made. There wasn't. Celeste entered separately with her attorney, a woman named Patricia Varela, who had immediately seen the value in cooperation. Celeste's bail was set lower contingent on surrender of her passport. She looked at me once across the courtroom. I didn't look away. I also didn't perform anything for her. I just let her see that I was there, that I was whole, and that whatever she'd expected from me, fury or collapse or desperate concession, had not materialized. Her attorney had already been in contact with the prosecution. Cooperation was the framework they were working in. The day after the arraignment, Gerald Whitmore called me personally. He was 80 seconds into an apology when I interrupted him. "Gerald, I don't need the apology. I need to know whether the firm has reviewed Bernard Croft's files." A pause. "We're conducting an internal audit." "Good, because the equity disclosure he helped prepare contained a forged signature. That's a matter of professional conduct for the Bar Association, and it's also potentially a matter of liability for the firm." I kept my voice even. "I'm not interested in a civil action against Whitmore and Associates, but I want your cooperation in the criminal matter, and I want your commitment that the audit will be complete and transparent." "You have it," Gerald said. He sounded like a man who just survived something he hadn't fully processed yet. "Thank you." I paused. "For what it's worth, Gerald, I don't think you knew." "I didn't," he said, and I believed him. 4 weeks after the arraignment, I sat across from Detective Rosa Whitfield in a conference room at the Harrington Bay Financial Crimes Division. She had the kind of steady, unhurried competence that reminded me of the best intelligence officers I'd served with, people who were patient, because they understood that evidence builds cumulatively and that shortcuts always cost more than they save. "We've connected Harlow to 8 victims across 4 states, she said, spreading photographs across the table. "Your recordings gave us the thread we needed to pull. 3 of these women had given up on any kind of legal recourse. Your evidence reopened their cases." I studied the photographs. Women in their 30s and 40s, a restaurateur, a physician, an interior designer, a retired professor. Each of them had encountered Marcus Harlow at a point when they had something he wanted, and each had paid for that encounter in ways that had reshaped their financial lives, and from what Rosa described, their willingness to trust. "Where are they now?" I asked. "Scattered. Most of them rebuilt eventually. A few are willing to testify. Your recordings of Harlow and Celeste corroborate details from multiple victim accounts in ways that are," she paused, choosing the word carefully, "compelling." "Use everything I have," I said. "Whatever you need." Rosa nodded. "There's one more thing. Helen Park, the forensic accountant, has agreed to cooperate fully. Through her records, we've been able to trace the transferred funds, including the money from your joint accounts. About 60% of it is recoverable in accounts that haven't been fully liquidated yet." I hadn't let myself hope for that. "That's more than I expected." "It's more than most victims in these cases get," Rosa said. "He's been getting better at moving money fast. With you, he didn't have time to finish the job." Part 5, Reconstruction. The hearing I hadn't planned for happened on the 14th day. I was in the office reviewing drawings for a small residential commission we'd taken on to keep the junior staff working while the larger projects moved through, permitting when Rebecca put through a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "Daniel Reeves." The voice was a man's, careful, deliberate, slightly formal. "Speaking. My name is Edward Harlow. I'm Marcus's father." A pause. "I'd like to speak with you if you're willing." I set down my pencil. "I'm listening." "Not on the phone." Another pause. "I'm in Harrington Bay. I flew in this morning. I've been aware of my son's activities for longer than I should have allowed them to continue without intervention, and I'm ashamed of that. I am not calling to defend him. I am calling because I have information that may be relevant to your situation. And because the thing I should have done years ago is to cooperate rather than protect." I thought about what Nia had told me, about the profile she'd built over 14 months, about the way Marcus had operated with apparent impunity across multiple jurisdictions. Someone had known. Not everything perhaps, but enough. "Where?" I asked. We met at the Harrington Bay Library, my suggestion a public space with no audio amplification issues and no association with either of us. Edward Harlow was 73, lean, with the precise posture of someone who'd spent a career in a field that required it. He'd been a surgeon, I learned now retired. He sat across from me at a reading table and folded his hands and looked at me with the expression of someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times and was relieved to finally be having it. Marcus has always had a talent for finding what people want to hear, he said. As a child, this seemed like social intelligence. As he got older, I began to understand it was something else, a capacity for reading vulnerability and using it rather than a genuine empathy. He looked at the table. His mother and I enabled that in the way that parents enable things they don't want to name. We covered for him. We explained him. We told ourselves he'd grow into something better. How long have you known about the fraud? I asked. I kept my voice neutral. The first incident I knew about was 12 years ago. A woman in Boston, a business acquaintance of Marcus's. There was a financial dispute that was settled privately, and my wife and I'm ashamed to say this, we provided funds to make it go away. He met my eyes. We told ourselves it was a misunderstanding. It was not a misunderstanding. And afterward, there were others. We knew about 2 of them. We chose not to know about the rest, which is its own form of knowledge. He reached into the briefcase beside his chair and withdrew a folder. These are letters. Communications between Marcus and myself and between Marcus and his mother going back 8 years. In them, he describes his methods sometimes as accomplishment, sometimes seeking advice. The letters are dated authenticated and in my own handwriting where I've responded. He pushed the folder across the table. I've already provided copies to Detective Whitfield. I came to you because you deserve to know the history you've been placed inside. I looked at the folder but didn't open it. Why now? Because I heard your name on the news and I recognized the pattern, and I'm 73 years old and the remaining time I have to do the right thing is shorter than it's ever been. His voice was steady, but something beneath it was not. I failed every woman my son deceived. I can't give them that back. But I can make certain that he doesn't deceive anyone else. I thanked Edward. Harlow shook his hand and took the folder to Raymond's office that afternoon. The letters it contained added a dimension to the prosecution's case that the state attorney later described as determinative, not because they proved guilt that wasn't otherwise provable, but because they demonstrated the deliberate, premeditated, long-term nature of the pattern in a way that moved the charges into a higher category of intent. I thought about Edward Harlow for a long time afterward. About the calculus of delayed accountability, the weight of what you defer and what that deferral costs the people it falls on. There was no justice in the timing of his decision to cooperate. But the decision itself was what it was, and I was not the right person to adjudicate it. That was for other people. And for whatever Edward Harlow carried with him for the remainder of his years. The restraining order application came on the 15th day exactly as Raymond had predicted. Celeste's attorney filed for an emergency protective order, citing the unauthorized entry to the Archer Street penthouse. Raymond filed our response within 4 hours, attaching the one-party consent documentation, the recording itself, and a motion to have the protective order petition dismissed as a legal maneuver in furtherance of an ongoing fraud. The hearing was set for the following morning. Courtroom C of the Harrington Bay Family and Civil Division was a room I'd passed hundreds of times in the years I'd worked in the building district, where municipal approvals sometimes required appearances before planning boards. It had the particular stillness of public institutions, the sense of weight accumulated over decades of decisions made in its air. I found it steadying, rather than intimidating, which I recognized as a response to having spent the previous 2 weeks doing serious work rather than panicking. Celeste arrived with Patricia Varela and Harrison Webb, the same lawyer I'd heard on the recording, the one who'd coached her on establishing a pattern of instability. Webb was polished in the way of someone who'd been paid well to appear confident, and I could see from across the room that he'd reviewed the protective order strategy carefully. What he hadn't reviewed carefully enough was our response filing. The judge assigned to the hearing was the Honorable Constance Aurelio, which I would later learn was either very good fortune or the result of the case being assigned to the only judge in the division with significant financial fraud experience. She read our response filing with visible attention before calling the session to order. And the expression on her face when she set it down was not the expression of someone approaching an ordinary domestic dispute. Webb made his opening argument. He characterized the Archer Street visit as an unlawful intrusion, characterized my public behavior at the Halcyon party as erratic and threatening, and characterized the recording as the product of a paranoid and controlling spouse who had violated his wife's privacy. It was a well-constructed argument for the facts as he understood them. Raymond's response took 12 minutes. He introduced the recording. He introduced the forensic accounting report on the Meridian creative transfers. He introduced Raymond's authentication analysis of the forged signature. He introduced the Edward Harlow letters. And then he played 38 seconds of the penthouse recording, specifically the portion in which Marcus Harlow discussed the psychiatric evaluation option. The courtroom was very quiet afterward. "Counselor Webb," Judge Aurelio said. Her voice had the quality of something with significant structural integrity. "Do you wish to revise your characterization of these proceedings?" Webb attempted 3 sentences and stopped. "I'm denying the protective order petition," Judge Aurelio said. "I am also referring this matter to the District Attorney, the Financial Crimes Division, and the State Bar. Court is adjourned." I watched Webb gather his papers. I watched Celeste sit very still while Patricia Varela leaned close and said something quiet. I watched Marcus Harlow, who had been in the gallery as a witness, move toward the exit with the controlled speed of someone who already knows they've lost, but is still calculating whether there's somewhere to run. There wasn't. The trials took 11 months. Marcus Harlow was convicted on 19 counts fraud, in multiple degrees conspiracy forgery by way of intermediary, and the attempted guardianship manipulation, which the prosecution had successfully argued, constituted attempted unlawful deprivation of liberty. The sentencing was life in prison without the possibility of parole. A sentence that the judge, a woman named the Honorable Constance Aurelio, who I later learned had handled 7 of the most significant financial fraud cases in the state's history, delivered with the quiet precision of someone who had decided what justice required and was simply implementing it. Bernard Croft was disbarred and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Helen Park received 3 years and full restitution requirements. The psychiatric evaluation contact, a man named Dr. Terence Albright, whose license was immediately suspended, received 18 months and a permanent bar from medical practice. Celeste received 4 years in a minimum security facility in exchange for her full cooperation with the prosecution. She had provided testimony against Marcus, against Croft, against Park, and against Albright, and the prosecutor had made the case that without her cooperation, several of the convictions would have been significantly harder to secure. Patricia Varela had done her job thoroughly. I didn't attend Celeste's sentencing. I'd said what I needed to say in the courtroom during my own testimony, and I'd meant every word of it. The marriage was over, the betrayal was documented and adjudicated. What remained was the future, which was, as it turned out, still significant. 3 months after Marcus's conviction, I was sitting at my drafting table in the office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Reeves and Calloway," I answered. "Mr. Reeves, this is Detective Whitfield. I wanted to let you know the civil recovery process has been completed for the joint account transfers. 64% recovered. The funds will be returned to the account by end of week." "Thank you, Detective. One more thing." Her voice took on a slightly different quality. "Patricia CO called me this morning. She wanted to know if she could reach you directly. She said she's been following the case and a pause. She said she wanted to thank the person who finally made it stop." I looked out the window at the harbor, where morning light was breaking across the water in the way it does in October, oblique and clear and somehow patient. "Give her my number," I said. Over the following year, I was in contact with 6 of Marcus Harlow's victims. Some wanted practical information advice about financial recovery, about navigating the legal system, about what to expect from the restitution process. Others wanted something less definable, the acknowledgement that what had happened to them had happened, that it had been real, and that someone outside their own head had seen it clearly. Nia Okafor's story ran in the Chronicle over 4 consecutive Sundays, a long-form investigation titled The Architect of Trust, which detailed Marcus Harlow's decade-long pattern with a comprehensiveness that had won her a regional journalism award. And from what she told me over lunch, 3 months after publication, an offer from a national publication she was still deliberating about. "You gave me the primary source I needed," she said. "Everything else was already in the folder. I just needed someone on the inside." "You gave me the context I needed to understand what I was looking at," I said. "I think we're even." She smiled. "The women who've read the piece, the ones who contacted me afterward, because they recognized the pattern, that's the part that matters." "Yes," I said, "that's the part." Reeves and Calloway Design Group won the commission for the Harbor District redevelopment project in the spring, following the trials. It was the largest project we'd ever taken on a 20-acre mixed-use development that would reshape the south waterfront over a period of 6 years. Priya had submitted our proposal while I was still navigating the legal proceedings. And she'd done it without telling me because she'd known I would say we should wait. "We don't wait," she said when I found out. "Waiting is for people who think the ground is going to stay steady. It doesn't. You build on what you have." I looked at the proposal she'd submitted. It was extraordinarily ambitious in its conception, precise in its engineering, attentive to the community context in ways that most large-scale urban projects never managed. "When did you have time to do this?" I asked. "Evenings," she said simply. "Some nights I just needed to work on something that made sense." I understood that completely. 14 months after the courthouse, I received a letter. It had been forwarded through the correctional facility's mail system, and the handwriting on the envelope was Celeste's neat leftward-leaning, the handwriting of someone who'd been taught penmanship in a different era. I held it for a long moment before opening it. "Daniel," it began, "I don't expect this letter to change anything, and I'm not writing it to ask for anything. I'm writing because I've spent the better part of a year in a counseling program that keeps asking me to be honest about the choices I made, and the honest truth is that I knew what I was doing. Maybe not fully. At first, Marcus was very skilled at keeping the fuller picture obscured until I was already committed. But there came a point where I knew, and I chose not to stop. I chose it because I was frightened. Not of you specifically, but of the life I'd imagined and the life I'd ended up with, and of the distance between them. Marcus made me feel like the distance could be closed, that there was a version of my future that was bigger and freer. He was a liar, and I was a willing listener. I've thought a lot about what you said at the courthouse, that he made you feel like a mark. He did the same to me, just in a different way. He made me feel like a partner when I was really just a tool. I can see that now with a clarity I couldn't manage before, and I understand that you saw it long before I did. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I forged your signature, Daniel. I helped plan something that would have destroyed everything you built. Forgiveness seems like too much to ask from anyone, let alone from you specifically. I'm asking you to know that I'm sorry in a way that doesn't require anything from you. Completely and without condition. The woman I wanted to be when I was 25 would not have made the choices I made at 39. I am trying to figure out who I am now with what's left. I hope the firm is well. I hope you are well. I hope whatever comes next for you is worth all of this. Celeste. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the file drawer where I kept the documents from the case, not in the active file, but in the archive section where things went that mattered but didn't require further attention. Some things close without resolution. The person you married either was the person you thought they were, or they weren't. And the retrospective archaeology of that question eventually reaches a depth below which nothing further is recoverable. I'd loved Celeste. Some version of her had loved me before the distance opened and Marcus Harlow moved into the space between us. That was worth acknowledging without requiring that it fix anything. I returned to the drafting table. The Harbor District plans were open in their 37th iteration, and the problem I'd been turning over for the past 3 days, a structural question about the load distribution along the waterfront-facing elevation, had begun to resolve itself in the way that problems do when you give them enough time and enough honest attention. That evening, I stood on the roof deck of the Halcyon where everything had begun 11 months ago. The city was spread below me in its familiar pattern: harbor lights to the south, the hill neighborhoods to the north, the grid of the commercial district in between. The building under my feet had been designed over 3 years of sustained imagination, every decision deliberate, every load tested, every system integrated into a whole that worked because its parts worked. I thought about what Marcus Harlow had tried to take and what he'd failed to take because he'd underestimated the thing he was trying to steal. Not the money, not the equity, not the business. The thing he'd underestimated was the quality of the ground. You build a life the same way you build a building. You understand what the earth below you can bear. You plan for stress. You build in redundancy. You accept that things will move and shift and require repair, and you repair them, and the structure remains. Marcus had bet on collapse. He'd been wrong. My phone buzzed. A text from Priya. The Harbor District client wants to add a cultural arts component to the South Block. 30,000 square feet. Can we talk tomorrow? I typed back, yes, I have ideas. Below me, the city went about its evening ferries crossing the harbor. The pulse of traffic on the bridge. A restaurant I could see from here, where people were being seated for dinner. A building where someone was probably reading a letter they hadn't expected. Another building where someone was probably working late because the work mattered and there was always more of it. Some things never changed. There would always be people who looked at what others had built and saw only what they could take. And there would always be architects of buildings of lives of the careful structures that made trust possible, ready to build again. The guest of honor, as it turned out, was still in the building. And the building was still standing. Epilogue. 2 years after the Halcyon rooftop, I had dinner with Nia Okafor to celebrate her story, winning the National Investigative Journalism Award. The restaurant was a small place near the waterfront. Her choice unpretentious, the kind of room where the food was serious and nobody cared about the decor. The Chicago victims found the piece, she said. All 3 of them. Patricia CO called me twice. She turned her wine glass slowly on the table. She said she cried when she read it. Not from sadness, from relief, from feeling like someone had finally told the story accurately. How is she doing? She rebuilt the company. Smaller than before, more cautious about partnerships, but successful. Nia looked across the restaurant. She asked me if she could reach out to you. She said, and this is a direct quote, "I want to thank the man who finished it." "I'll call her," I said. "I thought you'd say that." Nia smiled. "You know, when I first approached you at that rooftop party, I wasn't sure you'd be the right person. Sometimes the victim isn't, they're too damaged or too angry or too passive. You were none of those things." "I was all of those things," I said. "Just not publicly." She laughed. "Fair enough." She raised her glass. "To the ones who fight back. To the ones who build back," I said. We clinked glasses, and outside the window, the harbor lights were doing what they did every evening in Harrington Bay, arranging themselves into something that looked, if you were willing to see it that way, like a blueprint for everything that was still possible. The end. Cast of characters. Daniel Reeves, architect, co-founder of Reeves and Callaway Design Group. Naval intelligence veteran. Celeste Reeves, née Blackmore, real estate attorney, newly made partner at Whitmore and Associates. Marcus Harlow, born Marcus Heller, developer, CEO of Harlow Meridian Capital. Serial financial predator. Priya Anand Daniels, business partner, structural engineer. Co-founder of Reeves and Callaway. Nia Okafor, investigative journalist at the Harrington Bay Chronicle. Raymond Osei, financial crimes and asset protection attorney. Dexter Farrow, licensed private investigator, former law enforcement. Detective Rosa Whitfield Harrington, Bay Financial Crimes Division. Gerald Whitmore, managing partner, Whitmore and Associates. Bernard Croft, lawyer at Whitmore and Associates, co-conspirator. Helen Park, forensic accountant, co-conspirator. Dr. Terence Albright, psychiatric evaluation contact, co-conspirator. Patricia Varela, Celeste's defense attorney. Patricia CO, Marcus Harlow's first documented victim, Chicago.